So I'll show you how to go from this balsa wood to this finished acrylic road surface that's virtually bulletproof and scratch proof. Okay? Okay, so let's refresh quick, right? So remember how I laid on natural sand here? And it's transparent, okay? Why it is, that's just the way they designed the product, because I'd mentioned before and on the podcast when I was on there, I did a little bit of this, but I want to finish this on this feature episode because there's going to be quite a bit of road here, and I want to try to show as much of this as I can. So it's really an extension of Duncan Way. So this road, just for those of you that are wondering, goes down to section 3, and then this turns into Glover Road. Like actually Glover Road on the prototype is sort of, well, it sort of runs into Glover Road, but further up. But anyway, when you're building a layout, you have to bend the whole layout, right? So you can't run a linear layout straight. We don't have room. We got to turn corners every 10 feet, right? So in this case, this like this curve and turn is fairly prototypical, except for those of you that don't know. This is all prototypical in here, except for this was modified and changed for the purposes of, you know, linear length of a layout and to keep building the railroad, basically. So this road, because this separates, I explained that I need to merge this wood into this part of Duncan Way. And before you use this crackle paste, I just put a little bit right here. You can see it's already starting to crack, but I'm going to show you how I cover this. But before I do, I just want to mention that this is, like, this road surface can be any kind of wood. It can be canvas, it can be wood, it can be cork, it can be anything you want, but you have to seal the surface of whatever it is, whatever this medium wood is, with some kind of acrylic. So you can use this Varathane. This is basically outdoor diamond wood finished Varathane. You could probably use urethane. This is waterborne, non-yellowing crystal clear satin. I use this for everything, like for basing out and sealing cork and wood. If I'm going to be putting other products on top of it and water and washes, because it basically seals all of this and prevents you know, intrusion of water and warpages and things. It just really seals the deck, so to speak, and you're really good to go with almost any product after this. So that's what I do. So this wood was sealed with Varathane first, and then remember, I skimmed it with natural sand, which you can't see. But I don't know if you can hear this. This is like it's not smooth wood anymore, right? It's this natural sand, but you can't see it because it dries totally transparent. Which I mentioned before, because if you painted this wood surface, like gray, let's say, and then put this on, it would look almost like ice, right? It would look like a winter, you know, icy road or something. But when you put paint on here after, like washes of gray, it changes it all, and it starts to make it look like a more like road surface like this. However, we want to get this cracking here, and I'm going to show you how to do that now with crackle paste. Now that these layers are done, so it's been sealed, put the sand on, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this with a palette knife. You can get these at any art store, the same place I get this from. And I'm just going to basically take some, like just a little bit of it at a time, because it doesn't need to be glassy smooth. You just need to spread it out. So remember how I talked about this is a seam here, and then one day I might have to move my layout so I can basically crack this easy with this product or slice it with a knife. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to level this first to that seam just to hide it. And I'm not going to be worried about where this goes, like, or how even it is, because that's the way asphalt, well, asphalt's mostly like this. Concrete would be skimmed more through a more finish. But asphalt's been patched and, you know, covered over by multiple layers, potholes filled, etc. So whatever sort of anomalies that you create with this will look natural regardless, you know. So I'm just going to skim this down, and I don't have to worry, like I can end right here and I can just continue another day. You can see part of the fascia here. Well, this is thick plywood to build up this road, but eventually I'll just fill this and it'll get painted olive green. It'll become part of the fascia. So I'm just going to lay this like this and then leave this now, because this basically needs to dry, right? And make sure that you clean the rim off here with a damp rag, okay? I should do it, right? Like I take a damp rag and I clean the top of that off and then reseal this to extend the shelf life, which can vary depending how well you clean the lid, etc., or how you take care of your mediums and tools, etc. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to do. So when this dries, like in 4 hours, it'll probably start to crack, and I'll look at it tomorrow and then just see what it looks like. And then when it's dry, I can actually sand it, apply another coat, but I want to get this seam, I want to make this disappear a bit. Maybe even if it looks like it was a new section of asphalt, but just to get rid of that line, okay? And then we'll have another look at it. Okay, so here's a little bit of a closer view, and I want to talk about a couple of things before I move forward here and we get onto the paint eventually. I'm not totally happy with this, but before I do, I just want to explain to you why I have this, like why I did the road this way. Like why does it, like you cut out like a section of the road? Like I think a lot of people understand that, like because the fascia or the frame is not like a traditional square rectangular picture frame, like a piece of wood like this. Like if you were to build a diorama on something like this, like you would want to put the road on an angle. Like you don't run the road even to this edge. Like that's symmetry. Balance is where you run the road on an oblique angle, let's say. It just looks better. I mean, that's a sort of a given for the art of the diorama. And I find the same principle applies with model railroads as well, and it works really well. Like for example, like this is just a wood panel you can get at any art store. Like they're already pre-made. Like these make for excellent diorama bases, by the way. This has been sealed with varathane, so it's ready to go. And if any of you are wondering that maybe you want to try something like this, go to an art supply store and pick up a board, like a painter's board that's framed, and they're pretty much good to go. Just put a sealer on it and then have at her, right? And put a piece of track on, a creek, you know, or a little culvert bridge, stone bridge. So you can do a myriad of ideas or create any kind of scene that you might even be able to just do a building with the terrain around it and then just sort of plant it right into your layout. I'll just show you a quick example of, I was playing around with some of these products like acrylic. So this was inspired when I did, like I've been on the BC ferries quite a bit, and I remember looking over the bow one time, and the side thrusters were shooting out of the, you know, the bow, like to move the ferry. And, you know, you could just see the you know, like under the water just shooting out. It would create this kind of sort of light blue kind of, with, you know, from all the pressure of the air bubbles and all the froth. It was really far out. And I did this because it helped me learn how to do water better, like textures. So that's why I do things like this all the time. Like I still do, because it works, right? It helps you to do stuff like this. So this particular surface, I don't mind it, but see how aggressive it is right here? Like I don't want it too aggressive. Like this is a really sort of a fat resolution, whereas it gets thinner over here. So this is dried for a couple of days, so I can actually sand this. Like this is 220. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand this down a little bit just to feather it in nice, okay? It sands beautifully if you actually let it cure for like 48 hours or more in a climate-controlled room. It makes a huge difference. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but the effects on here of when you sand it, the lines and the cracking is just beautiful, right? So when I start to put washes on that, it's going to start to pop. And you're going to be in a position where, okay, where do I stop or how far do I go? But what I want to do is I think I'm going to, like instead of putting more of this on, I did skim the crackle paste. Like I put this crackle on first, remember? I sealed it with varathane, put the crackle on. You'll get the bigger cracking, the thicker the crackle paste is. The thinner it is, the finer it will be. So that's up to you to sort of measure that and try to create that as you're spreading it out. So I put this over top of this, and then I like I scraped it thin and then I sanded it, so it's changed some of this up, which I think is really looking cool. Because you'll never go wrong, no matter how many layers you put on. I think the only point that you can really wreck it is if you go too dark with your paint and color. Now what I want to do is I think I might skim it one more time. I just want to see what it'll do. I'm going to put crackle paste on there again, like another skim coat. And then I'm going to just let it dry again and then sand it again and then see what it does. And I'm going to keep this fairly thin now and even fill in some of that because I know it's going to crack again in another layer, which will be really, really awesome, okay? And then I'll stroke it over with some sandpaper and then we'll begin to paint it, okay? Okay, so now we're getting to the paint phase, and this looks pretty good now. So I've skim coated it 3 or 4 times, and there's lots of really cool variation. Part of the challenge of filming this and keeping everything kind of balanced is when you're dealing with white, it's kind of bright, and I don't know if you can see that detail very well. You should be able to though, but once it gets darker, it'll start to pop more. So I've covered a lot of this if you go to the search bar beside the community tab on the page Duncan Way, but some of it I sort of missed, so I wanted to show you some of the basic tools that I use and the 3 colors. I think I might have missed a color beforehand. So I use a basic soft brush like this like a 1 inch or 3/4, just to spread around the stain. And I say stain, this is paint, but I'll show you what I mean by that. Now let me show you one of the tricks to doing this kind of stain painting that I do often, okay? So I use this here by Golden, hashtag no sponsor, Wetting Aid, and it's for concentrated additive for reducing surface tension of water and for stain painting, okay, for stain painting. So this, I put a few drops into a bottle like this, like just a couple drops in this volume of water, and what this does is it reduces the surface tension on the acrylic here and allows these paints or this method to work as well as it does. If you don't use a type of wetting agent, it just won't lay down and flow the same way, okay? So you can use dish soap in a pinch, like just a drop. Don't use too much though. You don't want to get it so it's foaming, right? But this is designed for this, okay? They have a patent on it as well, but I've been using it for years now and I love it. It's great and it lasts a long time. But you can get that at an art supply store called Golden Wetting Aid, and it's number 3591-4. Number 3591-4. So this is just tap water, and it's a little spritzer with a few drops in here, and I'll show you how I'm going to use this. Now, you can put a drop of isopropyl alcohol in this, but don't try to shy away from using any isopropyl alcohol directly into this paint. Tamiya loves this. It really does. You can thin Tamiya all day long with isopropyl alcohol, whether it's 50% or 99 or anything in between. But try to avoid it with this. You can thin it, but it will coagulate on a bad day. So I don't normally, and I don't normally spray this anyway, but I use it for wet on wet, which is what I'm going to do here all the time. So I don't usually put isopropyl alcohol in here when I use this, but I will when I'm spritzing down like terrain, and I want to pre-soak it and then use matte medium in the same manner, but like maybe the thickness of my thumb on the bottom, and I'll water it for soaking down terrain to give it a sort of a hard shell that always stays flexible and never dries out and goes brittle. Okay, so these are the 3 colors that I use. This is all I use on all of River Road for my concrete textures in one shade or another, but I'll show you. So this is number 71.046. It's all Model Air. It doesn't mean it's just for the airbrush. It's just a type of color. It's a little bit thinner, but you have to thin it more to use it in an airbrush effectively anyway. But I like it because I like their range of colors. I don't have to pre-mix them. They're already established, so I know when I go to pull them off the shelf, I know what I'm going to get, right? And I'm after this, which I covered already before, but this is a bit of a revisit, but I'm being a little bit more comprehensive. So this is pale blue-gray, which I'll go from light to dark. That we're going to put on first. And then I have this here, number 71.054, dark gray blue. Notice the blue. They all have a type of blue, right? Pale blue, dark gray blue, and then there's this dark sea gray, which does have blue in it, but it has probably more black in it. This I'm going to use for the final colors to make some of these cracks pop more, okay? So what I'm going to do is I don't want to spend too much time on the initial layers because I want to get to the final layer that really makes this work and pop, okay? But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take this spritzer bottle and I'm going to wet down, once I basically vacuumed off, I've sanded this now too, right? And make sure all the dust is out. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to just mist it down. Okay. Not too heavy, but you know, so it's wet. You can see it's already popping a little bit from just the water. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put on a few drops of this. I just want to knock the white down a bit. So this is all we're doing is staining, right? The water is the solvent in this case. And then I'm just going to move this around and I'm going to drag it over onto the older existing asphalt. And there's going to be variations of color. Now you're not trying to paint it out, right? It's going to be different in different areas, and that's what we want. But you want to make sure that you just get the first initial light gray coat on just to help seal some of this crackle paste ahead of time. And I always find that to get rid of hard edges, just come back in like this. Okay? You can see that. I'm going to leave that. I kind of like that because that might change again when I add dark. So I'm going to let this dry, and then we're going to come back, and then we're going to try some of these other colors like this dark gray blue will work in, and then finish with this dark sea gray, okay? Okay, so time for the second layer or filter or wash. I like to call them filters. So we laid this first stain on 71.046 pale blue gray. We'll put that away now. We've just basically knocked down the white a bit, right? It's no longer that, you know, glaring white. Okay, it's just toned down very subtle, moving towards this color. So the next color we're going to use is this dark gray blue, 71.054. Okay. And what we're going to do is, as this is dry, we're going to wet it down again, right? Wet on wet, meaning the paint is wet and the surface is wet. Okay? So this is when things start to happen. So I just take the bottle, shake it up good, and just put a couple of drops like that for starters. Okay? Now the key here is to make sure that while you're working it that it stays wet. So you can see what's happening. So this is a type of stain now. And what's going to happen is it's going to go into a lot of those areas. And when you see sanding marks, things like that, those areas that you can come back and detail later as a type of tar line, etc. Okay. Now here's something else I'll do, is when it's laid on is I'll give it a little mist over, and you can see the little spots. Okay, so we want to let that dry. Okay, so see, filters, right? So you can do 3 filters, 1 of each color, or 6, 2 of each, whatever. You just have to move along from light to dark. You can see now how we're getting close here. You can sort of see a line there. But that line is not where the original seam line is. It's beyond that, so it looks like patchwork. Okay, so you can see how we're getting close there, right? With only 2 colors and a bit of water. All the texture, acrylic texture, ceramic paste and the crackle paste is doing all the work for us, right? With water mainly, with just a few drops of paint. That's all it takes. Less is better, as they say. So I'm going to let that dry. And then we're going to try a little bit of this dark sea gray. And then I'll show you one other thing you can do when you put the dark gray on, okay? Okay, so filter or layer number 3, right? So remember, pale blue gray, just a stain, it's wet, just a few drops, moving on, trust the thin layers, right? Okay, then we waited for it to dry, and then we did the same with dark gray blue. You don't want to get too dark too fast because you want the 3 different color shifts to act as significant filters so you can see them. They're very subtle, but it's what gives you this effect here. And then there's a 4th color here as a bonus I'll just show you at the end. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this dark sea gray. I really love this color. This is a really good color to have next to raw umber. This here, you know, in your paint kit. So what we're going to do is we're going to wet this down again. Shake it up good, this bottle. And then what we're going to do is grab this brush here, and then, so we're going to just be a little more strategic now. We're going to put a little bit there, and maybe just dab a bit over that white area. Okay, don't worry too much about coverage now. You're not painting the surface, right? See, that's painting a little bit too much there. We're actually staining. This will go a long ways. We're actually staining the whole surface. Now this is going to be quite dark, and that's okay, but make sure that you keep it wet. Okay? And I'm going to show you what you can do here now. If it gets away on you, I'll show you how to save it. Okay? Oops, sorry about that. I'm amazed I don't do that more often than I do, because it's really tight quarters here. So I'm going to take this now with a damp rag, and I'm going to just going to almost remove it. Take it down lighter than you would, like more than you would want to, because you can always restain it again, and you want to let it dry because it'll change when it dries. Okay, so you can see how close we're already getting to the other part of Duncan Way, right? See that? Okay, it's as easy as that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more water here, and oh, that, like, look at this down here. This is really fantastic. I'm going to put a little bit there. And this is cement 71.131. This is a nice color. It's almost an earthy tone, but when it dries, it looks really awesome. So I'm going to put a little bit into some of these areas here. And if a little bit of that gray, residual gray is still around, that's okay as well. Okay, so I'm going to leave that and let that dry. And then when it's dry, you can do other things, like you could take some really fine sandpaper and rub it down a bit. And when you see, just in closing here, when you see these kinds of things, like almost like, remember paint by number, like use the little shapes to fill in, like those are areas that are already established from the randomness of the texture paste that we laid in early on, right? Okay. Remember, lots of water is the key. That's your solvent. Wow, that's looking really neat. I really like that. And what we'll do is we'll just soften that one spot up just a bit of water. Okay. So we'll let that dry and then we'll come back and look at it and close, okay? How's everybody doing? So you can do these tar lines in many different ways. You can use pens, felt pens, paint pens. I personally like a brush. I just like to have a brush always in my hand, but I'll just show you quickly. Like here's just some really cool ones like by Sigma. This is like brush. This is dark brown. You can see it's like a little tip. It's actually flexible. These are awesome for doing, you know, all kinds of lines and rust spots on for weathering. And then this one's super fine pen for doing really fine lines. Probably more for end scale if you're that much into it. And then there's the larger different sizes, but they're all basically in art supply stores, right? Like Pigma Micron 0005 or 005, etc. But that's where I get all most of my materials when it comes to paint. I get from like the art supply store. Like in this case, close to my place, I go to Opus Art Supply to get all mine. I've always done it that way since I was a kid mostly. I mean, I like to get stuff from hobby shops too, but I find that art supply stores offer a greater variety and many options that you would never even think about that actually are revolutionary if you want to pursue painting. So you can see that I'm just wetting the brush here. This is this Vallejo. I like the blue-gray, the dark blue-gray. I don't like using black like this. It's just too stark. Like I tried a little bit down here, but I just covered it over. It's black is, like I said, I mentioned before, it's not a color, right? So you can see where water's the key, right? And I'll just say this in closing, like if you're going to use this method, acrylic painting, and the advantages is it dries really fast. You can build up layers really fast. You can turn the paint into a wash in just a matter of seconds. You need to use water, right? You've got to use water. You got to keep the area wet. Otherwise it just goes on like paint. You don't want it to go on like paint. You want it to go on like a wash. Like people use terms like taco sauce. All those are washes. It's just thin paint like what I'm showing you here. This is regular paint, just dipping it into water. Okay. So some of these little white anomalies, I sort of wet sanded this a bit, and it was a bit too white. So what I did was I just toned it down with some concrete. Super thin filter just to reconcile the roads. You can't really tell now, right? The join the seams through here, right? But you can trick the viewer and change some of that by doing things like this. So these roads would have been, you know, up here in Canada, it's mostly asphalt. They don't use concrete very often. Some of the railroads now in 2024 are using concrete slabs with steel extrusions on the edges on municipal overpasses now. But this overpass is unique, even though it's actually prototypically a double crossing. It's not controlled. Cars go over it, thousands of cars every day. But like I say, it's the way it is sometimes, right? As soon as you think it doesn't exist, well, it does in the real world if you get out. Okay, so this is looking pretty good now. Quite happy with this. And what I'll do is eventually I'll just finish the whole road all the way down like this. And it should look pretty good, like with the foreground. Like the road's going to be kind of in the foreground down section 3, part of it. Like I sort of split the road a bit, because I'll just also mention this too, that roads are a lot wider than right-of-ways, right? Railroad track right-of-ways. Oftentimes they make our roads quite narrow to fit the layout footprint, but I like to build certain things to scale that way. It just looks, I don't know, it really makes it feel like you're there. So yeah, so have fun, right? Like if you want to try acrylics, just remember lots of water, and the dry time is your friend if you want to move quick, okay?